Now, in the esoteric world, Satan is higher and older than the other brother, who is Jesus. And the war between the two of them is raging. And he, the older brother, was deprived of his position, but will regain it. He will be the victor. So good becomes evil, and evil becomes good. Of course, we know that he's a created being, because the Bible tells us so. But not in the esoteric world. Or another quote here from Blavatsky. Esoterically, he's also the serpent or the dragon that tempted Eve. And the dragon is an old glyph for astral light, which is the wisdom of chaos. So Jehovah is the serpent. He's the bad one. God is evil. So evil becomes good, and good becomes evil. Now, let's continue. In the movie, while on the cross, Satan, with an effeminate image, walks by, and he has the birth of the other Messiah. I want you to look at this child, because you can see his hairy arms and his baldness and his demeanor, and we're going to just quickly play this. I want you to look at the smile on this evil face. As he looks at the cross. They cannot have, look at the hairs on his back. They cannot have created a more evil image than this. And it's virtually subliminal, because nobody really notices it in the movie. And look at that evil smile. Now, good becomes evil, and evil becomes good. So the evil is hanging where? On the cross. But the real evil is actually the good, because you have to turn everything around in the esoteric world. This is actually a symbol of the victory of Satan over Jesus Christ. This is what it means. Now, let's just make sure. Mel Gibson told Christianity Today, I've been actually amazed at the way, I would say, the evangelical audience has, hands down, responded to this film more than any other Christian group. What makes it so amazing, he says, that the film is so Marian. Gibson calls her the tremendous co-redemptrix and mediatrix. So the whole movie is about Mary. Mary is the one who consoles everyone. Mary is the great hero of this movie, not Jesus Christ. Now, another final little interesting little tidbit about this movie. The penitent thief on the cross was wearing around his neck the Catholic brown scapular there. So if you look at the shot of him, he's wearing a scapular. Nowhere in the Bible do you read that he wears a scapular. Now, what is the scapula? The scapula is a structure that you wear around which guarantees you that Mary will let you bypass purgatory and take you straight to heaven. So it is a promise to Mary, not to God. So Jesus could not have given him the right to go to heaven one day. It's Mary that will decide who goes and who does not. But Mary, as we know, is an acronym for Lucifer, because she was immaculate without having to need the atonement. And then that Jesus said, it is accomplished, rather than it is finished. According to Rome, it was the Eucharist which was accomplished at the cross. Now, this word accomplished is rather interesting. The Eucharist, the sacrament of our salvation accomplished by Christ on the cross, is also a sacrifice of praise in thanksgiving for the work of creation, says the Catholic Catechism of the Catholic Church. So it was accomplished, almost consummated. And it is, of course, the perpetual sacrifice of Jesus Christ, the constant treading underground of the Son of God, keeping him perpetual death, worshipped as a corpse. This movie is evil. And you can see the underlying evil in the subliminals. It is Gnosticism at its worst, dished up and sold to Christians as the representation of the suffering of the Son of God. It is an evil movie. John 19 verse 30 says, Jesus therefore, when he had taken vinegar, said, it is consummated, and bowing his head, he gave up the ghost. So says the Douay-Rheims Bible, which is the official Jesuit Bible. Whereas a decent Bible will say, when Jesus therefore had received the vinegar, he said, it is finished. And he bowed his head and gave up the ghost. Now, Thea's definition is to bring to a close, to finish. The sacrifice is complete. It's not complete in this movie. Now, another interesting movie with Mel Gibson and Julia Roberts is Conspiracy Theory. Now, there are people who love to talk about conspiracists. And there are many conspiracists out there who are incredibly confused. But if you have the filter of the Bible and prophecy, and you put everything through that filter, and what comes out at the other end harmonizes not only with history and current events, but with prophecy as well, it's not conspiracy, it's confederacy. And the Bible says, call it not a confederacy, a confederacy. So I'm a confederist, I'm not a conspiracist. But in this movie, it's very interesting because he is subject to MK mind control, monarch mind control. And the whole issue is blatantly showing you how it is done. And in actual fact, this is what happens in the world. You can program anyone to do anything. So you can create the mega criminals and the murderers. When we were young, little children in school, there was no such thing as someone going psychologically berserk and blasting away everybody in the school. But now, it happens on such a regular basis. Have the kids changed? No. Something happening behind the scene. So all of these stars are all involved. Now, one of the things that is interesting about this movie, and it's only subliminal, it's only a flash. This book constantly appears in the movie. So Mel Gibson is in his mind-controlled state trying to get something, and he's trying to get copies of this book, and it's always disappearing, and he opens a shelf, and it'll flash for a millisecond and be gone. And you have to look very carefully. I don't suggest any of you look. It's called The Catcher of the Rye. So I want to know, what's The Catcher of the Rye all about? Must be important. And who would suggest that something be in a movie of this nature? So I did some searching, and it's very hard to find, until I found something interesting. I found an interesting book, The Secrets of Jesuit Soup Making, written, of course, by Jesuit brother Rick Curry. There's his title, S.J., Society of Jesus, and it is indeed a recipe book. But every book written by a Jesuit always has a what? Has a purpose. And it always is the mindset of the society as a whole regarding its oath and subject to the Jesuit general himself. So, of course, it is interlaced with all the Jesuit philosophy. And he's telling about his student days and how he was in a curriculum, etc. I was reflecting the other day on a Jesuit teacher of mine at St. Joseph, etc., and he talks about the curriculum. And he says here, the interesting thing is, the curriculum at St. Joseph was in the old style, the ratio studiorum, rational thinking. In other words, rationalism and not Bible-based thinking. The Jesuit plan of studies, first published in 1599, that was found in all the Jesuit high schools of the United States at that time, etc., etc., etc. So you're getting the picture. Then he says over here that he had an enormous impact on me, this teacher he had, this Jesuit, became a Jesuit himself. In English class, he had us read The Catcher in the Rye. Aha! Huh. So the Jesuits make you read that book, and there it is subliminally in this movie everywhere. I don't remember much about the novel from that first reading when I was a freshman, but I do remember that this Jesuit father said, this was the kind of novel you should read again and again in your lifetime. So I was interested, what is this all about? It's about rebellion. And it's brilliantly written. It is the normal development of a youth, and this youth develops the capacity, or the rebellion that comes up, and how to exercise this rebellion, and eventually to change the world through rebellion. But in such a brilliant way that the one who is rebellious against everything, his parents and society and you name it, turns out to be the greatest saint of them all. Who was the greatest rebel in heaven? And doesn't he want to appear as the greatest saint, the wronged one? So it's implanting a mindset of dissent against the order. What order was the Jesuit order created to destroy? Protestantism. So you have to rebel against Protestantism. One of the most evil movies in the history of Jesuitism is probably V for Vendetta. Now in this movie, they have this masked man, because he was injured, severely injured in a fire, so he went through the fires of affliction. It is a skit of the Jesuits and the gunpowder plot, where they wanted to blow up the British Parliament and King James. Now, again, whether it's a false flag and it's a double false flag or a triple false flag, let's not go into it, but British Parliament was that bastion of Protestantism that had banned Jesuitism and the mindset of Jesuitism and was the protecting factor of Protestantism. So it was the ultimate enemy. It had to be destroyed. And Guy Fawkes and 6 Jesuits wanted to blow up the British Parliament and the King, thus ridding the world of the menace of Protestantism. Now, the mask is the face of Guy Fawkes, who was sentenced to death and martyred. But in the movie, constantly, you are reminded that this story may never be forgotten. This man was not a villain, this man is a hero. Now, just in history alone, they've managed to do that, because every year on exactly the same date when he tried to blow it up, they celebrate Guy Fawkes. And it's a joyous occasion. Kids can't wait for Guy Fawkes. You positivize that which is negative, and you use the negative to your advantage. They even got Shakespeare to write it, which I doubt. His Jesuit superior wrote it for him, his Gnostic Medici learned supervisor, and filtered it in amongst the people as this evil of the Jesuits and made a joke of it. And eventually, as a consequence, the Jesuits were actually allowed to operate, or the Catholics at least, in England again. You always have to be a super strategist. Now, in this movie, this young lady eventually is the one that pulls the trigger because he dies just beforehand, so she becomes an acronym of Mary, which is Lucifer, who will destroy Protestantism, and where they first failed in their early attempts, they will succeed in their later life. And this is one of the advertisements. He's making the Masonic crossed swords, which you will find everywhere in Masonry and in Gnostic Freemasonry. An X is an ancient symbol, according to Jim Tressner, 33 Degrees, Scottish Rite Journal. An X is an ancient symbol for change or transformation, long associated in medieval and Renaissance art with the coming of the Messiah, who shall make all things new. So this is a religious movie showing the victory of Satan and the Jesuit order over Protestantism, the overthrow. That's why in the cathedrals they always have Loyola standing on the head of Martin Luther, crushing him, destroying the Bible. They make no bones about who the enemy is.